Hey there! Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the story. With every droplet soaking into her coat and every passing car splashing icy water onto the sidewalk, Margaret Maggie Collins tightened her grip on the crumpled slip of paper in her hand. Her steps were slow but deliberate, eyes fixed on the glowing sign ahead. Whitmore Grand, the most prestigious restaurant in the city. Tonight, it buzzed with the laughter of the wealthy and the clinking of expensive glasses behind its glimmering windows. She wasn't here to dine. She was here for something far more important. Her hair, streaked with gray, clung to her cheeks. Her dress was clean but plain, her shoes scuffed from years of wear. She paused at the steps, took a breath, and climbed. The awning did little to shield her from judgment. The moment she opened the door, silence flickered through the reception area. Eyes turned, mouths curled. "Ma'am?" came a sharp voice. "I think you've made a mistake." It was Sandra, the hostess, pristine in her black silk blouse, eyebrow raised. Behind her, the lobby sparkled with chandeliers and marble floors. "This isn't a shelter." Maggie stepped forward, unfolding the wet paper. "I have a reservation." Sandra laughed softly, turning to the security guard at her side. "Troy, do you see a reservation here? Maybe check under delusional?" Troy chuckled, arms folded across his chest. "Ma'am, people like you don't walk in here with reservations. Maybe someone gave you the wrong address." Maggie didn't flinch. "I'm not here to eat. I'm here to speak with someone. The director of the restaurant, James Whitmore." Sandra's smile faded into mock surprise. "Oh? You're here to see Mr. Whitmore? What is this? A lost relative reunion? Are you selling something?" "No, I just need to talk to him." Other guests, waiting for tables, began to take notice. A man in a tuxedo leaned over to his companion, whispering with a grin. A woman nearby took a picture with her phone. Someone muttered, "She should be outside playing a harmonica for spare change." The humiliation pressed like a weight on Maggie's chest, but she held her ground. "I'm going upstairs," she said quietly, stepping past Sandra and Troy. Troy blocked her. "You're not going anywhere." Just then, a voice called down the stairs. "What's going on?" The air changed. James Whitmore, tall, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, descended the staircase with the poise of someone who owned the room. And he did. His eyes, sharp and calculating, landed on the soaked woman standing in his lobby. He blinked once, twice. Maggie's lips trembled. "James." He looked her over as if scanning a stranger. "Do I know you?" Sandra leaned in. "She says she has a reservation. Wanted to speak with you. Claims it's urgent." James turned back to Maggie. "I don't know what this is, but this is not the place for whatever you're trying to pull. I don't have time for— I'm your mother." The words dropped like stones in a glass room. A pause. Guests who had laughed now stared in stunned silence. Even Sandra stepped back slightly. James didn't speak. He looked at her again. Really looked, as if trying to place her in a corner of memory that had long since been painted over. He swallowed. Then, "That's impossible." "I'm not asking you to believe me," Maggie said, reaching into her coat and pulling out a folded photograph. It was old, worn at the corners. "I just want you to see this." James hesitated. Curiosity flickered behind his eyes. Slowly, he took the photo. It showed a young woman holding a baby boy on a park bench. Her hair tied back, same gentle eyes. The baby's tiny hand clutched the edge of her dress. James stared at it. "I've seen this before," he whispered. This was in my file from the adoption center." Maggie nodded. Her voice cracked. "I had to give you up. I was very sick. I never stopped looking." James stiffened, torn between disbelief and something deeper. "Why now?" "I only found you recently. I walked by this place a dozen times, afraid to come in, afraid you'd hate me." He said nothing. The silence was louder than any insult. Around them, no one dared speak. Maggie's eyes welled up. "I just needed to see you once. Just to say, I'm sorry." He held the photo longer than he meant to, then handed it back. You need to leave." She flinched, barely nodding. But before she could turn, someone else came into view behind James. A woman with kind eyes and soft features. Linda. "James, what's going on?" she asked gently. James looked at Maggie, then at Linda. "She says she's my mother." Linda's eyes widened as she looked at Maggie, at her soaked coat, trembling hands, and the silent heartbreak written across her face. And something in her gaze began to change. Linda didn't speak at first. She simply stepped forward, her heels tapping softly against the marble floor, and studied Maggie with a quiet intensity. Maggie avoided her gaze, her body already half turned toward the door, ready to accept rejection. Again, but Linda's voice was gentle. "James, can we talk? Upstairs?" James hesitated. He glanced around. The guests still watched, their curiosity stretching into discomfort. This was not the kind of attention he liked. He nodded stiffly and motioned toward Sandra. "Clear the front. No one gets past the lobby for now." Then he turned to Maggie. "Wait here, please." It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a dismissal either. Maggie sat down on a velvet bench near the entrance, ignoring the dripping rainwater from her coat. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the chandelier above her. Each crystal refracted the light into 1,000 tiny stars. It reminded her of the hospital ceiling the night she decided to let him go, how the fluorescent lights had blurred through her tears. Upstairs, behind a glass wall tinted for privacy, James leaned against a mahogany counter while Linda sat on a leather chair, arms crossed. "She knew your name," Linda said quietly. "Anyone could know my name. It's on the building." She had a photo. She could have gotten that from the adoption agency. Linda gave him a look. "Why are you trying so hard to deny it?" James exhaled slowly. "Because if she is my mother, then I've hated a ghost all my life for nothing." Linda's expression softened. "And if she's telling the truth, that ghost finally came back." The words sank into the silence. James rubbed his eyes, fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know what to do with this." "Start by listening." Downstairs, Sandra approached Maggie again, now with less sarcasm. "Would you like some tea or water while you wait?" Maggie looked up, surprised. "No, thank you." "You're braver than I would be," Sandra admitted. Then, awkwardly, she walked away. Time moved slowly. The buzz of the restaurant carried on behind closed doors, but the atmosphere in the lobby was subdued. People weren't laughing anymore. Finally, James descended the stairs again. This time, alone. "Come upstairs," he said. Maggie stood, cautious but hopeful. They climbed the staircase in silence, side by side yet oceans apart. He led her into his private office. Sleek, modern, impersonal. "You can sit," he offered. She didn't. "I know you're angry," she said. "I would be too. But I didn't leave you because I didn't want you. I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, advanced stage. I had no one to care for you. My sister, your Aunt Eleanor, helped me place you in adoption. I thought I'd die." He listened, arms folded, jaw tight. "I survived the chemo, but it took years to recover. By the time I was well enough to search for you, your records were sealed. I looked everywhere." James's voice was low. "So why now? I found a volunteer online who helped trace your name. I never thought you'd be so close, or so successful." Her voice cracked with pride. James looked away. "You could have written, called." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you'd say I was too late." He didn't answer. The air was thick with things unsaid. After a long silence, he asked, "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "I just wanted to look you in the eye once, to see the man you became. That's all." That honesty disarmed him. He expected demands, regrets, but she didn't beg. She didn't accuse. Then he asked a question he didn't expect from himself. "Would you have kept me if you could?" Her answer was instant. "Always." James looked at her again. Really looked at the lines on her face, the kindness in her eyes, the sorrow she carried like a scar, and something began to shift. He walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a tissue box. handed it to her without a word. It wasn't an embrace, but it wasn't rejection either. "Let me process this," he said. She nodded. "Take all the time you need." He walked to the door, paused. "I'll have someone take you home. Give me your address." Maggie hesitated. "I don't have one. I'm staying in a shelter. Just temporarily." James flinched, not from disgust, but shame. She smiled softly. "Don't worry. I'm not here to ask for anything." He looked down, struggling with the storm inside him, then turned back to her. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Hope flickered in her chest. "Yes." He gave a tight nod. "Good night, Maggie." "Good night, James." As she left the restaurant, the rain had stopped. The streets still glistened, but the storm, at least for tonight, had calmed. The next morning, Maggie stood outside the restaurant an hour early. She hadn't slept. At 8 horas da noite, after returning to the shelter, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, playing James's voice over and over in her mind. "Can you come back tomorrow?" That single sentence had carved out a space in her chest, where fear and shame had lived for years. And in that space, hope began to grow. Small, fragile, but alive. She wore the same dress, carefully washed by hand and ironed with borrowed tools. Her shoes were polished as best she could. At exactly 9 horas da manhã, the doors opened, and this time, no one tried to stop her. Sandra, visibly less arrogant, greeted her with a subdued smile. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Follow me, please." The luxury of the restaurant still felt surreal. The velvet curtains, golden sconces, and the scent of truffle oil in the air. But Maggie walked differently now. She no longer felt like a trespasser. Not today. James waited in the same office. He stood when she entered, more composed than the night before. "Coffee?" he offered. She blinked, surprised. "Yes, thank you." They sat, cups in hand, facing each other across the polished desk. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not awkward, just uncertain. Finally, James broke it. "Last night, I didn't handle it well." "You were shocked. I understand." He nodded. "I thought about everything. I even looked up Hodgkin's lymphoma treatments from the early 80s. What you went through, I can't imagine." "I don't want pity," she said gently. "Only truth. I know." He looked into his cup. "I realized something last night. I've spent my whole life wondering why I was left, creating stories in my head. That maybe I wasn't wanted, that maybe I was a mistake. And the truth is, I never knew I needed answers until you showed up." Maggie's voice was soft. "And now that you have some, do they help?" He hesitated. "They hurt. But yes, they help." A long breath left her lips. He leaned forward. "There's something I want to do. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I'd like to introduce you to my wife and my son." Her heart nearly stopped. "You have a son?" 4 years old. His name is Noah." Maggie's eyes welled up. "May I see a picture?" James reached into his wallet and handed her a photo. A little boy, curly-haired, smiling in a blue sweater, his eyes impossibly familiar. Tears blurred her vision. "He looks just like you. When you were a baby." They both smiled. Small, cautious, but real. "Linda wants to meet you too," James added. "She's the one who told me not to slam the door before knowing the whole story." "She seems kind," Maggie murmured. "She is." He paused. "Tonight, we're having dinner at home. I want you to come." Maggie's hand trembled slightly. "Are you sure?" "I am." But just as hope began to steady itself, the door opened. A tall, silver-haired man walked in, one of the restaurant's board members. "James, sorry to interrupt. Quick question about the renovation." He stopped, noticing Maggie. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." James stood. "Mr. Fields, this is—" "I know who she is," Fields said with a hint of irritation. "The woman from last night, the one people were talking about." Maggie lowered her eyes. James bristled. "She's my guest," he said firmly. Fields looked skeptical. "I understand, but this isn't good for the brand. The press is already spinning things. Some clients are asking questions." James crossed his arms. "Let them. She's my mother, The man's eyes widened. I didn't know. You didn't ask. A heavy pause settled. Fields cleared his throat. I hope this personal situation doesn't interfere with business. James's jaw tightened. Thank you. That'll be all. The door closed. Maggie looked up. I didn't mean to cause trouble for you. You didn't, James said quickly. They just don't know what matters yet. But doubt flickered across his face. She saw it. You don't need to choose between me and them, she said. I've lived without you for so long. I don't want to be the reason you lose anything now. James leaned forward, firm. Maggie, I already lost you once. I won't do it again. The words landed like a promise. Still, outside the office, whispers grew louder. Photos from the night before were making their rounds online. A woman in soaked clothes standing in the lobby. The look on James's face caught mid-reaction. Internet articles speculated about everything from scandal to secret wealth. At the shelter that afternoon, Maggie was approached by one of the volunteers. You're the woman from the news, aren't you? The restaurant story. Maggie smiled shyly. It's complicated. The volunteer nodded. If it's true, it's beautiful. But that night, something unexpected happened. As Maggie waited outside James's apartment for the dinner he promised, a black SUV pulled up. Linda stepped out alone. Her eyes were full of sorrow. There's something you need to know, she said. James isn't coming. Maggie's heart cracked again. He's scared, Linda whispered. They threatened to pull their investments. The board wants him to distance himself from the story. Maggie closed her eyes. Linda reached out. But I don't agree with them. And neither will he. Once he realizes what truly matters. The apartment door never opened that night. Maggie stood motionless at the entrance long after Linda had gone back inside. Her arms folded tightly around herself as the wind picked up, brushing strands of gray hair across her face. Her chest rose and caiu em silêncio. Não de raiva, mas de desapontamento profundo demais para ser expresso em palavras. She had expected something. Not perfection, not even warmth, but effort. A table set, a child's laugh echoing from inside, maybe even James waiting near the doorway. Awkward, but sincere. Instead, she got silence. And silence, she had learned, could be louder than any door slamming shut. The next morning, Maggie didn't return to the shelter. She needed space to think. She wandered the park near the train station, clutching the same worn purse she always carried. She sat on a bench for hours, watching people walk their dogs, children running past in laughter, couples sharing quiet conversation. She could have had this, once, and maybe, in some distant way, she still could. But hope was no longer dancing. It sat quietly beside her, waiting. That afternoon, Linda called. Her voice was careful, like someone stepping over shattered glass. He didn't sleep, she said. He barely spoke this morning. He's spiraling. He said he needs time to think. Maggie's voice was steady. Tell him not to worry. I'm not angry. I understand. No, Maggie, you don't. He's never dealt with emotion. His adoptive parents were cold. Everything he's built, this restaurant, the image, the control, it's all armor. Maggie nodded, though Linda couldn't see. He's afraid of breaking. Exactly, Linda whispered. But sometimes, things need to break to let the light in. There was a pause. Then Linda added, Please don't give up on him. I never did. As night fell, Maggie returned to the restaurant, not to see James, but to speak with someone else. Sandra. She waited until the dinner rush slowed, then approached the front desk. Sandra looked startled, almost nervous. I'm not here to make a scene, Maggie assured her. I just wanted to thank you. Sandra frowned. For what? For not laughing today. The young woman's eyes softened. I did laugh, at first, and I regret it. Maggie smiled. We've all made mistakes. Sandra hesitated. I Googled you. I read about the cancer, about the shelter, and about James. Half of it's true, Maggie chuckled dryly. Sandra bit her lip. Can I ask, why didn't you just keep the story quiet? Avoid all this embarrassment? Maggie met her eyes. Because I've already lived in silence for too long. Hiding never healed me. Only truth could. As she turned to go, Sandra called out, "If I ever see my mother again, I hope I'm brave enough to tell her I was wrong." That night, as she lay on a cot beneath the flickering shelter light, Maggie took out a small wooden box from her bag. Inside it were pieces of her past, the hospital ID bracelet, the photo she had shown James, and a letter she had written 5 years ago, but never sent. It was addressed simply, "To the man I hope you've become." She unfolded it and began to read again. "I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect you to forgive. I only hope that, if one day you hear my name, it won't feel like a wound, but a whisper of where you came from." She closed the letter and pressed it to her chest. The next day, something changed. At dawn, a taxi pulled up outside the shelter. A young boy jumped out, followed by Linda. Maggie rushed to meet them, heart pounding. "Noah insisted," Linda said, smiling. "He kept saying, 'I want to meet Grandma.'" Maggie knelt down, tears welling up. "Hi there." Noah looked at her, curious and innocent. "Are you really my grandma?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, if you'll have me." He smiled and ran into her arms. Maggie held him tightly, overwhelmed, and over his shoulder she saw James, standing across the street, alone, watching. He didn't cross, didn't wave, just watched, his expression unreadable. But as he turned to walk away, he placed something on the bench near the park entrance and walked off into the city. Maggie, still holding Noah's hand, walked over. It was the wooden photo she had given him, now in a simple black frame. Next to it, a note. "I'm not ready to be your son, but I'd like my son to know his grandmother." And beneath that, written in smaller handwriting, "Come to dinner tomorrow night. No cameras, just us." Tears rolled down Maggie's cheeks as she clutched the frame. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door, and this time, it wasn't locked. The next evening, just before sunset, Maggie stood once again before the tall wooden door of James's apartment. But this time, her heart beat differently. Not with fear or doubt, but with cautious hope. She wore a modest navy dress, her hair carefully brushed and tied back. Linda had helped her prepare, even offering her a small pair of pearl earrings. "You deserve to feel like you belong," she'd said. And maybe, just maybe, this time, she did. The door opened before she could knock. Noah stood there with a wide grin, holding a drawing in his hands. "I made this for you, Grandma." Maggie knelt down. "You did? Let me see." It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures. A tall man, a small boy, and a woman with gray hair and a bright red heart above her head. "That's me," he said proudly. "That's Daddy, and that's you." She smiled through tears. "It's perfect." Linda appeared behind him, warm and glowing. "Come in." The apartment was quiet and filled with a soft light from the setting sun. It smelled like rosemary and fresh bread. A small dining table was set with care. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful. Maggie noticed 3 plates. James emerged from the hallway. No suit, no tie, just a soft gray sweater and jeans. His eyes met hers. No words, just a slow, almost imperceptible nod. They sat together. Linda poured wine. Noah chatted excitedly about school, superheroes, and how he wanted to be a chef like his dad. The mood was light, surprisingly normal. Maggie laughed more than she had in years. Every now and then, she caught James watching her, like he was trying to reconcile 2 realities, the woman he never knew and the woman sitting at his table now. But just as peace began to settle in, the conversation turned. "So," James said, his voice measured, "what happened after you gave me up?" Maggie hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. "After the adoption, I stayed in the hospital for nearly a year. The chemo was aggressive. I lost everything. My hair, my strength, my apartment. I lived in shelters for a while. My sister helped where she could, but then she passed unexpectedly. I never had other children, never married. My life stopped. And then, slowly, it began again. Little jobs here and there. Cleaning, sewing, caregiving, and every year I tried to find you, until I finally did. Silence fell over the table. Even Noah stopped coloring. James took a sip of water. You went through all that, alone? She nodded. It wasn't your burden to carry. But it was my story, too. Their eyes locked, and something old began to crack. Not easily, not all at once, but enough. I didn't want to be angry, he confessed, but I was, for so long, at everyone. And now, I don't know who to be anymore. You don't have to know, she said softly. You just have to be. That night, after dinner, Maggie helped clear the table. Linda dried the plates as they stood in the kitchen. Two women who had once been strangers, now linked by something stronger than blood. Love and choice. He's trying, Linda whispered. It may not look like much, but it's the most he's ever opened up to anyone. I can feel it, Maggie replied, and I won't rush him. In the living room, Noah climbed into James's lap with a yawn. Daddy, can Grandma come every Sunday? James kissed the boy's head. We'll see. But then he looked at Maggie. Maybe Saturdays too. Maggie smiled, her heart aching in the best way. But just as the evening seemed to close on a hopeful note, Maggie's phone buzzed in her purse. An unknown number. She stepped into the hallway and answered. A trembling voice spoke. Is this Margaret Collins? Yes. This is City Health Services. You're listed as next of kin for a patient. Richard Collins. He's been admitted. Critical condition. Her knees weakened. Richard, her brother-in-law, her late sister Eleanor's estranged husband. A man who had vanished years ago after abandoning them both. He listed me? Yes, ma'am. He's been homeless for some time. Said your name just before he collapsed. Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. He's alive, but fading. James appeared at the end of the hallway. Everything okay? Maggie hung up slowly. I have to go, she said, voice shaking. Now? She nodded. Someone needs me. James didn't ask who. He only said, Do you need a ride? No, she replied gently, but thank you. He stepped closer. Will you come back? She reached out and touched his hand. If you'll have me. And then she walked into the night, not away from her new family, but toward another piece of her past that needed healing. But what she didn't know was that this visit to the hospital would change everything again. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and regret. Maggie sat alone in the waiting area, the hum of fluorescent lights above her and the faint sound of a heart monitor beeping down the hall. The last time she'd been here was decades ago, fighting for her own life. Tonight, she was here for a ghost, a man who had once been family, then disappeared like a breath on cold glass. Margaret Collins? A nurse called gently. She stood. Yes? You can see him now. Room 240. But he's not responsive. The doctor doesn't think he has much time. Maggie nodded and followed the quiet footsteps down the corridor. Her heart pounded with a strange mix of dread and duty. She hadn't thought about Richard Collins in years. Not since he abandoned Eleanor, not since he left without a word, taking their savings and breaking her sister's heart. When she entered the room, the man lying in the bed looked nothing like the confident, silver-tongued man from her memories. His cheeks were sunken, his skin pale and thin like parchment. Tubes ran from his arms, and machines clicked softly beside him. She pulled a chair close and sat down. "Richard," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered faintly. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she said. "After what you did to Eleanor, I wasn't sure I wanted to." No response. "But when they said your name, I came. Because you're family. Because once, you were part of us." She reached for his frail hand. "You hurt her, and you ran. I don't know why you came back now, or why you asked for me, but I'm here." She waited, not expecting anything, but slowly, his mouth moved, barely audible. "I was wrong." She leaned closer. "What did you say?" His voice, hoarse and thin, cracked. "I lost everything. I wanted to find her, tell her, but too late." Maggie swallowed hard. "Eleanor passed. Years ago." A single tear rolled from his closed eye. "I'm sorry." he rasped. Silence filled the space between them. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly, "but I'll stay. You don't have to go alone." He gripped her hand weakly. And then, just minutes later, the machines slowed and stopped. Richard Collins took his final breath, holding the hand of the woman whose life he had once broken. Maggie stayed there, long after the nurses entered, and began to unhook the machines. Her eyes were dry, not because she wasn't moved, but because her soul had already cried enough for one lifetime. She walked home slowly, her feet aching, her spirit even more so. The streets were quiet, the city lights painting blurred halos in her tired vision. The next day, she didn't go to the restaurant, nor did she answer James's messages. She needed to be alone. At the shelter, she sat in the common room with the wooden box in her lap. She removed the hospital bracelet from years ago, then the framed photo of her and baby James, and finally, the letter he had left on the bench. She read it again. "I'm not ready to be your son, but I'd like my son to know his grandmother." The words that had once offered hope now felt fragile. What if she'd returned to his life just to shake everything loose? What if the right thing to do was disappear again? But as the thoughts swirled, a knock came at the door. One of the volunteers peeked in. "Maggie, there's someone here to see you." She stood, confused, and walked to the entrance. Noah, dressed in a bright yellow raincoat, holding a large paper bag of cookies, grinning from ear to ear. Behind him, Linda. "We missed you," the little boy said. Maggie knelt down, her throat tight. "I missed you too." He hugged her, and the bag of cookies crumpled between them. Linda crouched beside them. "James didn't come. He's overwhelmed. He doesn't say it, but I can see it. He's terrified of losing control." "I know," Maggie whispered. "He wants to see you, but he's scared you'll leave, that if he lets himself care, he'll lose you again." "I'm not going anywhere," Maggie said, her voice breaking. Linda touched her hand. "Then tell him that." Later that night, Maggie stood outside the restaurant once more. The city was alive, but the sidewalk felt strangely still. She stepped toward the glass entrance. Inside, James sat alone in his office, staring at the photo of his mother holding him as a baby, the same one he had framed, placed beside his desk. He didn't hear the knock. He didn't notice her until the door creaked open. And when he looked up, Maggie stood there, small, tired, but unshaken. "I buried someone today," she said. James stood slowly. "I sat with him while he died. A man who once hurt the person I loved most, and I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I couldn't carry that pain anymore." James swallowed hard. "I don't want you to carry mine either," she said gently. "I'm here, James. I always will be, no matter how long it takes you to be ready." He opened his mouth to speak, but emotion caught first. She reached out, brushing a tear from his cheek, the same way she used to when he was a baby. And for the first time, he didn't flinch. But he still didn't say the words she longed to hear. Not yet. 2 weeks later, the restaurant closed early on a Sunday evening, an unusual event for such a high-end place. The staff were given the night off, no explanation provided. Just a soft handwritten note on the kitchen board that read, "Family matters come first." Inside the private dining room upstairs, a table was set not with white linens and crystal, but with simple dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, and a warm apple pie. There were no customers, no servers, no noise, just a quiet gathering. James stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, watching the city lights twinkle below. Linda lit 2 candles at the center of the table, while Noah carefully placed folded napkins beside each plate, humming to himself. Maggie arrived shortly after. She paused at the entrance, taking it all in. The soft music playing in the background, the smell of home-cooked food, the boy who waved at her with chocolate already smeared on his chin, and the man, her son, who turned to her not with hesitation but with something new in his eyes. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied. They sat together. Noah talked the most, bouncing between stories of preschool adventures and his new drawing of a dragon that looked suspiciously like a horse. Linda filled the spaces with laughter. And James? James listened, not as a distant observer, but as someone present, engaged. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Linda served tea while Noah dozed off beside a pile of blankets and picture books. Maggie sat on the sofa, holding a warm mug, when James spoke again. "I've been going to therapy," he said quietly, "since the night you came to the restaurant." She looked at him, surprised. "I didn't know how much I had locked away," he continued. "How much anger, confusion, how much fear. You showing up didn't just shake my life. It broke something open, and I didn't know if I hated you or missed you." Maggie said nothing. She just listened. "But I realized," he went on, "I didn't know you. Not really. I only knew the hole where you should have been. And I kept trying to fill it with achievements, with control, with perfection." He took a breath. "But the more I've thought about it, the more I realize I want to know you. I want Noah to know you. Not just as a name or a guest at our table, but as my mother." Tears pooled in Maggie's eyes. He reached into a drawer and pulled out something small, a key. She looked at it, confused. "It's to the apartment above the cafe on 12th Street, he said. "We've been renovating it. It's not huge, but it's yours if you want it. It's close, safe, and warm." Maggie covered her mouth with one hand. "James, I'm not doing this out of guilt," he said quickly. "I'm doing it because I want you near, not just for holidays or quiet dinners, but for real life, the boring days, the messy ones." She stood slowly and walked to him. Tears finally escaped down her cheeks. "I don't have much to give back." "You've already given me the truth," he said, "and that's more than I ever had." They embraced, for the first time, not as strangers, not as a wound and its scar, but as a mother and her son. Weeks passed, and life took a gentle rhythm. Maggie moved into the apartment. She learned how to bake cookies with Noah every Saturday morning. His favorite was chocolate chip, though they always burned the first batch. Linda would often stop by with fresh flowers or a new recipe to try. And James? James came often. Not for long conversations, not for dramatic confessions, but for presence, for coffee, for quiet dinners, for healing. One afternoon, as they sat on the apartment's tiny balcony, sipping tea and watching the city below, James turned to his mother. "You know, that night, when you first came into the restaurant, I thought you were going to ruin everything." She smiled gently. "And now? I think you saved me." She reached over and took his hand. "No," she said. "We saved each other." The sun dipped low, painting the buildings in gold, and for the first time in a very long time, Margaret Collins felt whole. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, comment the word reunion to show you were here. And if this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your company, and I'll see you in the next unforgettable story of life.